She had no idea that the man she had just humiliated in the lobby of her own company would be signing her paycheck by Friday. Rain tapped against the windows of Halbrook and Vance that morning, and inside, everything looked ordinary. Employees rushed past with coffee cups in hand, phones buzzing, elevators chiming. Nobody paid attention to the older man in the gray uniform kneeling near the front entrance, wiping up a spill that was never his to begin with. He worked quietly, the way he always did, the way people had grown used to ignoring. But this particular morning would be remembered by everyone who witnessed it, though none of them understood why just yet. Danielle Whitmore walked through those doors the way she always did, heels striking the marble floor with purpose, coffee cup in one hand and her phone pressed to her ear with the other. She was already annoyed before she even stepped inside, frustrated by a meeting that had been moved up an hour, irritated by a text she hadn't answered yet. And then, without warning, her shoulder collided with the man kneeling by the entrance. Her coffee spilled across the floor in one long, dark streak, splattering against his uniform, his hands, his shoes. For a moment, the lobby went quiet, waiting to see what would happen next. He didn't react the way people expected. He simply reached for his cloth and began wiping the mess away. Calm, unbothered, the way a man behaves when he has faced far worse than spilled coffee. But Danielle wasn't finished. She looked down at him, irritation twisting into something colder, something crueler, and said the words loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Some people are just born to clean up after the rest of us." She said it without hesitation, without a flicker of guilt, the kind of sentence that reveals exactly who a person is when they believe no one important is watching. The man froze for only a second. Not from anger, not from embarrassment, but from something closer to quiet recognition, as if he had just confirmed something he already suspected about her. He lowered his eyes back to the floor and continued cleaning, saying nothing at all. A few co-workers who witnessed the moment looked away, uncomfortable, unwilling to challenge her, unwilling to defend him. Danielle straightened her blazer, stepped over the wet floor sign, and walked toward the elevators without a second glance, already forgetting his face before the doors even closed behind her. What she did not know, what none of them knew, was that this ordinary Tuesday morning was about to become the last morning any of them would ever look at him the same way again. Somewhere above her, on the top floor of the very building she worked in, a boardroom was being prepared for an announcement that would shake the entire company to its foundation. And the man she had just humiliated in front of her coworkers, the man she dismissed without a second thought, was about to walk into that boardroom wearing something no one had ever seen him wear before. 3 days. That was all the time that remained before everything Danielle believed about her place in that company, and about the people she considered beneath her, would come crashing down in front of everyone she worked with. 3 days before the name on the door of the executive suite would no longer belong to a stranger, but to the man she had just wiped from her memory as easily as the coffee stain wiped from the floor. She had no idea what was coming. She had no idea who he really was. And she had absolutely no idea that Friday morning would change the rest of her career forever. Before we go any further into this story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Now, let's go back to where it all truly began, long before that coffee ever hit the floor. Nobody at Halbrook and Vance knew much about the man in the gray uniform. He had been part of the building for years, moving through hallways and offices with a quiet consistency that made him almost invisible. People said good morning to him out of habit rather than genuine acknowledgement, the way you might greet a chair or a door frame. His name was Marcus Bellamy, though most employees would have struggled to recall it if asked. He kept to himself, arrived early, left late, and never once complained about the way people spoke to him or the way they looked past him as though he wasn't standing right there. But quiet men are often the most dangerous ones to underestimate because their silence is rarely empty. It is usually full of things other people simply haven't earned the right to know yet. There were questions nobody in that office had thought to ask, questions that would only make sense once everything came undone. Why did Marcus Bellamy never react to disrespect the way most people would? Why did the head of security greet him with a level of respect that seemed almost out of place for a janitor? And why, on the rare occasions someone tried to look into his background, did the details always seem thinner than they should have been, as if pieces of his story were being carefully kept out of view? Danielle never asked these questions. She never had a reason to. In her mind, Marcus was simply part of the scenery, someone whose life outside those walls never once crossed her thoughts. What Danielle failed to notice, what everyone failed to notice, was the quiet weight Marcus carried with him every single day he walked through those doors in that uniform. He wasn't hiding out of fear. He wasn't ashamed of the mop or the cart or the uniform that made people assume they understood exactly who he was. He carried himself the way a man carries a secret he has decided not to explain to people who haven't earned an explanation. And somewhere beneath that calm, unreadable expression, Marcus Bellamy was watching everything, remembering everything, quietly gathering an understanding of exactly who deserved his trust and who did not, long before anyone realized they were being measured at all. To understand how a single coffee stain on a marble floor could unravel an entire company hierarchy, we have to go back further, long before Danielle Whitmore ever stepped foot inside Halbrook and Vance, back to the very different lives these two people were living before their paths ever crossed in that lobby. Danielle grew up in a modest house in Ohio, the kind of childhood where nothing was ever quite enough. Her parents worked long hours just to keep the lights on, and she remembers watching her mother count coins at the kitchen table more times than she could count. From a young age, Danielle promised herself she would never live like that. She studied hard, pushed herself relentlessly through college, and took the first corporate job that offered her a taste of the life she had always dreamed about. Ambition became her armor. Titles, promotions, and recognition weren't just career milestones to her, they were proof that she had escaped the version of herself she was terrified of becoming again. But somewhere along the way, that fear twisted into something uglier, a need to prove her worth by making sure everyone around her understood exactly where they stood beneath her. Marcus, on the other hand, had lived an entirely different life before anyone at Halbrook and Vance ever met him. Years earlier, he had built something of his own, a small logistics company that started in a garage and eventually grew into something worth millions. He knew what it meant to sign paychecks, to make impossible decisions, to lose sleep over decisions that affected other people's families. But life has a way of testing even the most successful men, and after a personal loss that nearly broke him, Marcus made a choice that surprised everyone who once knew him. He walked away from boardrooms entirely, choosing instead to disappear into something simple, something honest, something that asked nothing of him but his hands and his time. Nobody at Halbrook and Vance knew that the quiet man pushing a cart through their hallways once ran a company of his own. Nobody knew that his decision to work as a janitor wasn't born from a lack of options, but from a desperate need to remember who he was without a title attached to his name. It was pure circumstance, and a discreet handshake deal made months earlier that had quietly placed Marcus back into the very world he thought he had left behind. though nobody inside that building had any idea what was coming. Behind closed doors, a private equity decision was already underway, a decision that would connect Marcus Bellamy to Halbrook and Vance in a way none of his coworkers could have imagined. The wheels had already been set in motion weeks before Danielle ever spilled a single drop of coffee on that lobby floor. She just didn't know it yet. None of them did. If you're just joining us, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss where this story goes next. Because what happens between Marcus and Danielle over the following 3 days is about to change both of their lives permanently. Over the following months, Danielle's disregard for Marcus became something of an unspoken pattern inside the office, so consistent that most people stopped noticing it altogether. It started small, the kind of behavior that could almost be excused as thoughtlessness rather than cruelty. She would step around him without acknowledgement when he cleaned near her desk. She would raise her voice slightly when speaking near him, the way people do when they've decided someone isn't worth lowering their tone for. But small cruelties have a way of growing bolder when they go unchallenged, and over time, Danielle's treatment of Marcus stopped being thoughtless and started becoming deliberate, almost performative, especially when there was an audience nearby to witness it. One afternoon during a meeting with an important client, Marcus happened to be replacing a light fixture just outside the conference room. Danielle, mid-presentation and eager to appear commanding in front of people she wanted to impress, gestured toward him without even glancing his way, and made a joke about how some men peak in life fixing light bulbs while others peak in boardrooms. The client laughed politely, uncomfortable but unwilling to challenge her. Marcus said nothing. He simply continued his work, his expression unreadable, though anyone paying closer attention might have noticed the faint tightening of his jaw, the only outward sign that her words had landed somewhere they weren't supposed to. There was another moment weeks later when Marcus quietly repaired a server issue that had been causing chaos in the office for 2 days. A fix that saved the company from a costly outage nobody in IT could figure out. When leadership asked how the problem had been resolved, Danielle, sensing an opportunity to shine in front of people who mattered, claimed she had personally coordinated the solution with an outside technician. Marcus overheard the entire conversation from the hallway, mop in hand, saying absolutely nothing as she took credit for work she had no part in. He simply nodded to himself, the way a man does when he is quietly confirming something he already suspected about a person's character. It wasn't just the big moments that revealed who Danielle truly was. It was the small, careless comments dropped in passing, remarks about his age, his uniform, his lack of ambition, comments she never seemed to think twice about, because in her mind, he simply didn't matter enough to warrant that kind of consideration. Coworkers who witnessed these moments often exchanged uneasy glances but rarely said anything, unwilling to risk their own standing by defending a man who occupied the lowest rung of the company's unspoken hierarchy. And so the pattern continued, week after week, each careless remark adding another layer to a reputation Danielle was building without even realizing it. A reputation that was quietly being noticed by someone she had no idea was paying attention. The final incident, the one that would set everything into motion, happened on an otherwise unremarkable Friday afternoon. Danielle was laughing with a small group of colleagues near the break room, recounting the coffee spill from earlier that week as though it were an amusing anecdote rather than a moment of real humiliation for another human being. She rolled her eyes and said, loud enough for anyone nearby to hear, that someone really ought to replace him, that the company could do so much better than a man who couldn't even hold a broom straight. Her colleagues laughed along, some out of genuine amusement, others simply because it felt safer to laugh than to object. None of them noticed Marcus standing just around the corner, well within earshot, quietly absorbing every word. He didn't confront her. He didn't say a single thing. He simply turned and walked away, disappearing down the hallway with the same calm, unreadable expression he always carried, the kind of expression that gave absolutely nothing away about what was happening beneath the surface. By Monday, an email would arrive in every employee's inbox, an email that would send a wave of confusion and speculation through the entire office. And by Friday, the woman who had once said someone ought to replace him would find herself sitting in a boardroom, staring directly into the eyes of the very man she had spent months dismissing, humiliating, and underestimating. If this story has you on the edge of your seat, make sure you're subscribed, because what happens next changes everything Danielle thought she understood about power and about the people she believed she was better than. The email arrived at exactly 9:17 on Monday morning, and within minutes, it had become the only thing anyone in the office could talk about. The subject line was simple, almost deliberately vague. Leadership transition. All staff meeting Friday, 9 a.m. No further explanation was given. No names mentioned. No hints about what the meeting would actually involve. In an office where information usually traveled faster than official announcements, this particular silence felt unusual, almost unsettling. Employees gathered near coffee machines and in hallway corners, trading theories back and forth, each one more elaborate than the last, while the actual truth sat quietly out of reach, waiting for Friday to arrive. Danielle, like everyone else, spent the following days consumed with speculation. Her first assumption was that the company was merging with a larger firm, something that would explain the secrecy and the sudden urgency behind the announcement. Her second theory involved layoffs, a possibility that sent a flicker of anxiety through her chest despite her usual confidence. She replayed her recent performance in her head, reassuring herself that her numbers were strong, her client relationships solid, her position secure. What never once crossed her mind, not even for a passing second, was that the meeting had anything to do with the quiet man she barely acknowledged each morning as she walked past him toward the elevators. As the week progressed, small details began surfacing that Danielle brushed aside without a second thought. Details that would only make sense once she looked back on them later. A senior partner she rarely interacted with nodded toward Marcus in the hallway with an unusual level of familiarity. A visitor in an expensive suit was seen shaking his hand near the parking garage, speaking to him with the kind of respect typically reserved for people much higher up the corporate ladder. Even the head of security, a man known for being strictly professional with everyone, greeted Marcus with something that looked almost like deference. Danielle noticed none of it. Her attention remained fixed entirely on herself, on her own trajectory, on the version of the future she had already decided belonged to her. By Thursday evening, the anxiety in the office had reached a quiet, simmering peak. Employees whispered in the elevators, exchanged nervous glances during meetings, and refreshed their inboxes obsessively, hoping for some kind of clue before the official announcement. Danielle spent that night at home rehearsing what she might say if leadership asked for her input on the transition, already imagining herself standing near the front of the room, contributing insight, positioning herself as someone valuable to whatever changes were coming. She had built an entire narrative in her mind, one where she remained exactly where she believed she belonged, at the center of it all. Friday morning arrived gray and quiet, the kind of stillness that seems to settle over a building right before something irreversible is about to happen. Danielle walked through the same lobby she always walked through, past the same spot where she had once spilled coffee across the floor without a second thought, though she didn't spare it a single glance this time. She rode the elevator up with a group of coworkers who spoke in hushed, nervous tones, none of them quite meeting each other's eyes. When the doors opened onto the floor reserved for executives and important guests, a floor she rarely had reason to visit, her stomach tightened slightly, though she couldn't explain why. The boardroom doors were already open when she arrived, and nearly every employee from every department had gathered inside, filling the room with a tense, uncertain energy. Danielle found a seat near the front, straightening her blazer out of habit, glancing around the room to gauge everyone else's reactions. Conversations quieted as the company's outgoing director stepped forward to speak, thanking the room for their patience and reminding everyone how important transparency was during moments of change. And then, without any further delay, he gestured toward the door at the side of the room and asked everyone to please welcome the company's new majority owner and incoming chief executive officer. The door opened, and the room fell into a silence so complete that the sound of footsteps against the floor seemed impossibly loud. Marcus Bellamy walked in wearing a suit that fit him with an ease that suggested it had never truly been foreign to him at all. His posture straighter, his presence entirely different from the man employees had walked past for years without a second glance. He moved to the front of the room with quiet, unshaken confidence, the kind that cannot be rehearsed, only earned. Danielle felt her breath catch somewhere in her chest as recognition crashed over her, the realization arriving in slow, unbearable waves. The man she had humiliated in the lobby. The man she had joked about replacing. The man whose paycheck she now understood, in this exact moment, had likely carried her own signature all along, waiting for her to notice. Before we continue into what happens next, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Now, let's step inside that boardroom and witness the moment Danielle Whitmore finally understood exactly who Marcus Bellamy really was. Marcus stood at the front of the room for a long moment before speaking, allowing the silence to settle fully over everyone gathered there. He didn't rush. He didn't perform. He simply looked out across the faces of people who had worked alongside him for years without ever truly seeing him, and when he finally spoke, his voice carried none of the anger anyone might have expected from a man who had endured months of quiet disrespect. Instead, it carried something far more unsettling, a calm, measured steadiness that made every word land with more weight than shouting ever could have. He thanked the room for their patience, acknowledged the uncertainty of the past week, and explained simply that Halbrook and Vance had recently come under new ownership, an acquisition finalized quietly over the previous several months. And then, without dramatics, without a single glance in Danielle's direction, he confirmed what half the room had already begun to suspect. He was the man behind that acquisition. He was their new chief executive officer. Danielle sat frozen in her seat, her mind racing to reconcile the man standing at the front of the room with the man she had dismissed so easily for months. She thought of every careless comment, every eye roll, every moment she had made him feel small in front of people whose opinions she cared about far more than his. She thought of the coffee spilled across his uniform, the words she had spoken without hesitation. Some people are just born to clean up after the rest of us. And the memory of her own voice saying those words out loud made her stomach twist with a shame so sudden and complete that she barely registered the rest of what he was saying. Around her, coworkers exchanged stunned glances, some recalling their own small cruelties, others simply overwhelmed by the revelation unfolding in front of them. Marcus continued speaking, addressing the room with the same calm clarity, explaining his vision for the company moving forward. emphasizing values he clearly cared about deeply: respect, integrity, the belief that every person within an organization deserved dignity, regardless of their title or their position on an org chart. He never once mentioned Danielle by name. He never called her out in front of her colleagues, never used his new position to publicly humiliate her the way she had once humiliated him. But everyone in that room understood exactly what his words meant, and everyone understood exactly who needed to hear them the most. Sometimes the most powerful form of accountability isn't public punishment. Sometimes it's simply being forced to sit with the truth of who you've been, in front of the very people who watched you become that person. After the meeting ended and employees slowly filed out of the boardroom, murmuring quietly amongst themselves, Danielle remained seated for a long moment, unable to move, unable to process the full weight of what had just happened. When she finally stood, she found herself face to face with Marcus near the doorway, both of them alone for the first time since everything had changed. She opened her mouth to speak, though no clear words came, only the beginning of an apology tangled somewhere between shame and disbelief. Marcus watched her struggle for a moment before speaking first, his tone quiet, steady, entirely without cruelty. He told her that he wasn't interested in revenge, that punishing her for who she had been wouldn't undo any of it, and that what mattered now was who she chose to become, now that she understood he had been watching all along. In the weeks that followed, something shifted within Danielle that went far deeper than fear of consequences or concern for her career. She began noticing the people around her differently: the interns, the assistants, the maintenance staff she had once walked past without a second thought. She found herself pausing to say good morning to people she previously ignored, offering credit where it was due, instead of claiming it for herself, listening more than she spoke. It wasn't a dramatic transformation overnight, and it wasn't perfect. Old habits rarely disappear completely. But something had cracked open inside her that Friday morning, a recognition that the way you treat people who can offer you nothing in return says everything about who you truly are. Months later, when a new hire joined the company, young, eager, and clearly nervous on her first day, Danielle found herself walking past the same lobby where everything had once unraveled, and instead of rushing by without acknowledgement, she stopped, introduced herself, and offered a genuine welcome. It was a small moment, one that likely meant very little to anyone watching. But for Danielle, it meant everything. It meant she had finally learned the lesson Marcus never needed to teach her with anger. He had simply given her the space to teach it to herself. This story is a powerful reminder that the people we overlook, the ones we assume don't matter, often carry more history, more strength, and more quiet dignity than we could ever imagine. We never truly know who someone is behind the role they happen to be standing in on any given day. Before you go, let us know in the comments, have you ever misjudged someone the way Danielle misjudged Marcus? And looking back, is there anything you wish you had done differently? We'd love to hear your story. And if this video moved you, don't forget to subscribe, because we share stories just like this one every single week. Stories about the quiet power of dignity and the people who remind us what it truly means.